Hello, welcome to this webinar on publishing your work. I'm Paul Kirschner. I work at CELSTEC, the Center for Learning Sciences and Technologies. And assuming that you carry out research, the next step after you've carried out your research is, of course, making it known to a broader public. That means getting your work published. This webinar will be about the most important aspects of getting your work published. What you'll hear later is one of the major sins when you're publishing is plagiarizing someone else. A lot of the things that I'm telling you here are based upon my experience as editor of 2 different journals and also editorial board member of quite a number of other journals, as well as having written quite a lot. But also I've made use of things that I found on the web. I've done my research. So I'd like to thank, in any event, these people. I made use of their slides, their papers, also their thoughts at certain points within this webinar. You can say doing a piece of research or getting it published is a process that consists of 7 steps. The first, the most important, is do the research. Sounds very strange, but there have been a number of things in the newspapers about scientists who have published quite a number of things, but forgot to do the research first. First, do the research. The second step is choose the journal. I'll go into this in a second, but that's strangely enough, or it sounds strange enough, it's the second step, not the last step. You don't write your article and then choose your journal. It's the other way around. Third is write the article. For me, the Bible is APA 6. That's what I use to teach me, to tell me exactly what I should do and how I should do it. But remember, I'm publishing in education and the learning sciences, and those areas make quite a lot of use of APA 6 as the basis. Other journals make use of Chicago Manual of Style, all different types of other things. What I often say to my PhD candidates and my fellow researchers, make use of a conference as a dress rehearsal. Plan your writing such that you present it at a conference, you get feedback then from your discussant and from your audience, and within 4 to 6 weeks after having presented it, then you can make the final changes and send it off. You could see it as being like a first review of your article. Submit the article, wait, and for some journals it's wait and wait and wait and wait for a decision. Don't be afraid to get in touch with the editor to ask what's the status of my manuscript. Revise the article. I say this without saying jump for joy because it's been accepted, because that almost never happens, that it's accepted. You have to minor, major, resubmit. We'll get into that in a second. Revise your article. Even if it's been rejected and you want to present it somewhere else, the reviewers will give you a good idea as to how you can make it better. And if it's accepted, enjoy, and then start again. I think it's important for all researchers to understand how the publication procedure actually works. You write your article, and the first author, that's also on the first page of your article, the corresponding author, that first author submits to the journal, usually electronically, almost always electronically at the moment actually. The central office will then often assign an editor to the manuscript, and the editor will examine the manuscript and assign the reviewers. The editor at that point in time often takes a look at the article and makes a decision. Does it fit within the scope of the article? Is it written in a way that agrees with the guidelines? Is it of the right length? All of those types of things. At that point in time, it might be rejected because it's out of scope or it doesn't fit within the guidelines. That's not really a problem because you really want that. You want the editor to say that at the moment that he or she gets it, because if it goes into the review process and they determine that while a reviewer is reviewing it, that means you've lost anywhere from 4 weeks to 16, 20 weeks before you can resubmit it to another journal. I'm the editor of 2 different journals. I will assign it to reviewers who I think are the people qualified to do the review. It's often someone that you've cited yourself who has published within my journal. I send it to reviewers, and the reviewer decide whether or not they want to review it. Depending upon the journal, 2, 3, sometimes even 4 reviewers are required to do a review. For example, at Computers and Human Behavior, we say there have to be at least 2 reviews. That's our standard. They read it, they critique it, and they make a suggestion as to whether or not it should or should not be accepted. At that point in time, when I, as an editor, have a sufficient number of reviews, the amount that we've agreed upon, I will then decide, based upon their reviews, whether or not it is accepted, rejected, whether or not it needs to be revised, and to what extent. And at that point in time, I will let the author know it. Remember, it is almost never an accept. I think I might have had 1 journal article in my whole career that's been accepted without at least minor revisions, usually major revisions. Remember, what for the editor might be a major revision, you might see as a minor. That doesn't matter. It's in the eyes of the editor. The author then revises the paper and sends it back. There's a possibility of a second review process. Often it's been except with minor revisions. The editor will look and see whether or not the revisions that were made are sufficient. If it's major revisions, it will often be sent to the reviewers that did the original review. And finally, if all goes well, after 1 or 2 resubmissions, it's published, first online and then on paper. I've discussed it a little bit. What are the possible decisions that an editor can make? You can either accept it with few or no revisions. As I said, that almost never happens. You can accept it with minor revisions. That's often language things or small mistakes. Accept with major revisions. That means you have a significant amount of work in the revision phase. Something comparable to that is to reject but allow resubmissions with a major revision. What is the difference between that? As an editor, I look at what I want you as an author to do, and if I think it's doable, even if there's quite a lot of work, then I will often choose for accept with major revisions. If I have the idea that that which I'm asking is either so great or you might not be able to do the things I'm asking, I will reject but allow for resubmission after a major revision. An important aspect of this is the first one gets your expectations up with the idea of if I just do that, it will be published, and is often the case. The second is it can be re-rejected even if I've done or I've tried to do what someone wants. It's kind of like not getting someone's hopes up is the second alternative. Then there's a reject. That's because there's something fatally flawed in the research. And finally, reject by topic. And that's where I began when I was discussing what an editor does, looks at it and says, does it fit within? That means, has nothing to do with the quality of the article. Usually the email that you'll get will say that. It has nothing to do with it. But it's more, I've looked at it within hopefully 2 weeks after having it been entered into the system. And in my opinion, it doesn't fit the scope of the journal. And I'll often give ideas as to what journal you should resubmit to. This is a flow chart with thanks to Michael Derntel, who published this on the web and also in an article or actually a paper. You begin, start is the paper submitted by you. What I look at as an editor is, has it met the basic requirements? Scope, length, those types of things. If the answer is no, then I'll reject it immediately. Within 2 weeks you'll hear about that. And you can do what you want with it and hopefully resubmit it somewhere else where it's within the scope or the type of research or the methodology that another journal makes use of. If the answer is yes, I'll often assign reviewers. Those reviewers will review and give a recommendation and then comes back to me within the system. And at that point in time, I make a decision. It might be that a reviewer says reject, but I think it could be a major revision, So I might not decide to do what the reviewer or reviewers say. It's also been the case that they say a major revision, and I've looked at it and I said, no, this is a reject with resubmission or a complete reject. I make the decision it could also be a reject there, but this is now usually 3 or 4 months later. It could be that a revision is required. You revise, you resubmit it, and we look and see whether or not it can go into the system again. And if it's accepted, you jump for joy, and it's published. Now, if you remember what I said, in that series of 7 steps, after doing the research, the second is choosing a journal. Why do I say it's the most important second step? Because you need to choose the right journal. I've seen people, I've had PhD candidates and colleagues who first write their paper and then decide where to submit it, and find out that their 9,000-word article, they want to submit it to a place that says this is only 4,000 words that are allowed. Or that they've set it up in a way with different headings and a different order within it that doesn't meet what the journal that they're submitting, so that they do a rewrite of it. At this point in time, after you've done the research, the first thing you think about is, if I'm writing an article, where would I submit it? Now, there are a couple of rules of thumb. For example, what have you studied? If you studied computer-supported collaborative learning, then you will probably go to the International Journal of Computer-Supported Collaborative Learning, a journal dealing with educational technology, advanced learning systems, those types of things. If you've done a review, you'll go to a journal that deals with reviews. If you have data, you won't go to Educational Psychologist, which is a theoretical journal. So what have you studied? What is the topic? And what type of research have you done? The second is, whom have you cited? If you've cited researchers that have published in certain journals, the best thing to do is to submit it to that journal. That journal is making use of the theory and the type of research that you've also done. If I am an editor and I have any question about does it fit in my journal, after having read the abstract and gone through diagonally, gone through the paper, what I then do is I look at the reference list. And if I see you've cited no one from the journal from which you're submitting it, that means you've made no use of the theory and the methodology and the type of research that's done in my journal, then my question is, why are you submitting it here? If it's dealing only with primarily clinical psychology and you submit it to a journal on computer-assisted learning, for example, I'll say, why haven't you submitted it to something dealing with clinical psychology, even if it's about making use of the internet? So examine your own references for common journals. That's a good place to submit it. A third question you can ask yourself is, where do your colleagues publish? Is there a tradition of doing research on the topic you've studied? Scan the current contents for journals that match your topic. After you've made a preliminary decision, go take a look at the journals. Look at the last, you can do it online, look at the last 12 months and see the titles and the abstracts of what's been published. See if it's the same types of things that you're dealing with. Take a look at the length and see whether or not your article will fit into it. That's the same, read and scan the articles then of recent issues of those potential journals. Then take a look at the quality, the value of what you've done. Sometimes you've done something that has earth-shattering results. Other times you've done something that bring the science a small step further, in which you have not really incredibly groundbreaking things to report. Take a look at what you've done and choose the proper journal for that. Don't go for an impact of 4.0 if you've only brought the science, the theory, one small step further. Finally, what's the impact factor of the journal, and is the journal referenced? A lot of universities, especially in Europe, only accept articles for your curriculum vitae that have been accepted by peer-reviewed impact factor journals, ISI, SSCI journals. Once you've chosen your journal, go make sure the structure of your manuscript is proper. If you want to go in depth into this, I'd suggest looking at the webinar, Writing a Journal Article, step by step with common mistakes, do's and don'ts. I'll suffice to say the major parts are a title page, your abstract, introduction to your article, theoretical part, the body of the article containing methods, materials used, the results, discussion and conclusions, your acknowledgements, your references, and finally, your figures and tables. Before submitting, make a final check. It's kind of like doing your income taxes. Make sure you've included everything that you should include when sending it off to the IRS. Is the paper the right length? Have you written a 9,000-word article for a journal that usually accepts only things between 4,000 and 5,000 words? Is it well organized, according to what I just presented in the previous slide? Are the design and analysis used sound? It deals also with the last bullet. I'll go into that in a second, but are they sound design? Have you included a control group if it's a factorial design? Have you analyzed it factorially but haven't included a factorial design? Then maybe you should use compare t-tests. Do the conclusions follow from your results? Are you concluding things that your results proved, or are you making conclusions that aren't based upon statistically significant results? Have you cited all of the relevant references? That means what you have in the back, in the reference section, is also in the front within your citations. Are all of the tables and figures necessary? And have you referred to them in your text? Are the title and the abstract fully descriptive of the text? Are the people who want to find your article, can they find it based upon your title? Is it specific enough that the right people will find it? Or will it attract the wrong people? Is your abstract a standalone abstract, because most websites from journals contain a title, the authors, and the abstract? Do they tell exactly what you've done, why you've done it, what you found, and what you conclude from it? Or is it something that doesn't say enough to get the editor, the reviewer, and the reader enthusiastic? Are there any ethical concerns with the research or paper? Have you done things, used instruments that you haven't ethically tested, that you haven't asked for conformed consent, or things like that? Informed consent. And finally, are statistics proper and satisfactory? Have you done parametric tests with non-parametric data? Have you, this is my pet peeve, have you made use of statistical tests that compare the means and standard deviations of Likert scales when you're actually not allowed to do that? Although many of my colleagues do that, and you could possibly even find journal articles that I've written in which I've done it. Okay, you've submitted your paper, your manuscript, and you get it back. What might happen? The first thing is it a total rejection or rejection with an invitation to resubmit? And you're saying, why is that first total rejection on a slide that says resubmission 1? Because if it's rejected without an invitation to resubmit, make good use of all of the comments of your reviewers who have reviewed it with your best intent and have probably found some flaws or even fatal flaws in your manuscript, in your research. Modify your paper, make use of it, and resubmit it to another journal. If you were invited to resubmit, do it. Don't say, oh, it's been rejected and resubmit, well, I'll go somewhere else. You have to think of it, you have now your foot inside of the door. You have an editor who's looked at it and says, well, we're asking for quite a lot, but we think it's got the quality, if it's revised, to be in our journal. So your foot's in the door, make use of that. Resubmit it there. If you resubmit, answer either positively or negatively all of the reviewer comments. And it's usually from 2 reviewers. That can be sometimes pages of comments. But answer them all in a letter to the editor. But concentrate on what the editor has said. because the editor has read the reviews and usually made 4 or 5 major comments as to what has to be done. That's what you concentrate on. But don't not, I know this is a double negative, don't not answer all of the comments or critiques. And never, never, never dismiss any reviewer's major comment. If a reviewer says, I find this incredibly important, don't not answer that. Second aspect when resubmitting, check the time limit given for resubmission and keep to it. If they give you 30 days, take a maximum of 30 days. If it's going to be longer, please notify the editor about that. Otherwise, they'll have this idea that you're really not going to do it. And eventually, it'll be thrown out of the system. And then you'll be starting from scratch, probably with different reviewers who might find completely different things that they don't like in your manuscript. So it's more a plus getting the person who originally reviewed it, because you know you're trying to revise it in a way that will get him or her on your side. If you don't do it on time, it'll be a new submission, you'll get new reviewers, and they might have completely different pet peeves and give completely different problems. Write a cover letter in which you address all reviewers' comments. Concise, often in a table. What did the reviewer say and what have you done, so that the editor and the reviewer can find that easily. It's important to understand what your mindset here should be. Often when you read the reviews, you'll look at it and you'll say, man, that review is dumb. That's the wrong mindset. The mindset is, I wasn't clear, and not that the reviewer didn't understand it. The reviewer is really not out to sabotage you and really does his or her best to understand what you've written. Don't attack or belittle a reviewer. But on the other hand, don't be intimidated by a reviewer. The reviewer has done it with your best interests in mind, with the journal's best interest in mind, and has been impartial and objective in it. Sometimes they don't often say it in a way that sounds sympathetic. You can say that to me as an editor and I will talk to that person, but never in your commentary that goes to the reviewer attack or belittle that person, but also realize that you've done the research. You're good. You're a good researcher. Don't be intimidated by him or her. Address all of the criticisms and refute them if you think you're right. I've often said, the reviewer says this and this, but if you look at that and that research and that, actually the reviewer hasn't seen it in the right way, because maybe the reviewer doesn't know about this and this research that says you can do it in this way. So if you want to refute the reviewer, you can, but give the arguments and the references to prove that you're right. That's no problem. Be polite and indicate you're doing everything possible to react to the criticisms and make it better, and not only done everything possible, you're doing more. You're trying to please the editor, the journal, and the reviewer. When you're submitting, you have to realize that there also are a number of things that are not very ethical. The first is multiple submissions. When you submit to a journal, you have to, in your cover letter, actually say that it's original research and it has not been submitted anywhere else. That's actually your word that it hasn't been. It's a contract that you're signing with the journal. No journal will accept a paper in which there are multiple submissions. And don't submit to others on the sly, because I've had reviewers come back to me and say, strange, you're asking me to review it. Another journal has asked me to review the exact same article. The pool of reviewers isn't that large. Eventually, you'll get caught. Redundant publications. Don't try to publish the exact same thing or almost the exact same thing a number of times. That comes with plagiarism, because with redundant publications, you'll often rewrite the same things that you've written in an earlier article. Plagiarism is also self-plagiarism. Journals have guidelines, and that's actually that no more than sometimes 15-20% of an article can be an article that was published somewhere else, even if it's from you. And most journals make use of plagiarism checkers, in which they'll find that 80% of your article is the same as another article that you've published. Now, goes without saying, data fabrication or falsification, improper use of respondents, unethical things, having done unethical things with them. For example, giving learning materials to a group of students that have to make use of it and will get a grade on it in which you know beforehand that they won't learn properly from it. And finally, improper author contribution. An author is someone who has contributed to an article, theoretically, writing. It's not someone that you acknowledge because they read something and commented on it for you, or that they proctored an examination, or that they wrote they transcribed the protocols. Those aren't the places. The author, the person isn't an author. That person should be acknowledged. Now, with thanks to Nigel Cook from Geology Reviews, he's made a list of accepted, what gets you accepted. I think if you listen to what I said, attention to details, check and double check your work, consider the reviews, that your English must be as good as possible if you're submitting to an English language journal. Your presentation is important, that you take your time with revisions, that you acknowledge those who have helped you, including your funders, that what you're presenting is new, original, and previously unpublished work, that you critically evaluate your own manuscript, that you put it aside and reread it and say, is it really as good as I think it is? And that you've obeyed all of the ethical rules. In conclusion, submit to the right journal, that the scope is the right scope, that the prestige impact factor is the right level for the type of research that you've done, and also that the level of study that you've studied is the proper level. Don't submit research on university students to journals only dealing with primarily elementary education, and vice versa. Submit to only one journal. Pay attention to the journal's requirements. There's nothing that will get an editor more angry than if you submit to his or her journal and haven't heeded the journal's requirements. And you don't want to get a reviewer or an editor mad at you before they have to read your article. Pay attention to writing style and structure. That means if you've chosen to write your manuscript in the first person, use the first person throughout the journal. Check the journal's requirements. Some journals want you to only write in the third person. The researchers thought, this research proved. Other ones really don't matter. But if you've written in paragraph 1, we studied this, and in the next paragraph, the research showed, you've not been consistent with your style, and your editor and your reviewer will not appreciate that. Check the English. If English isn't your mother language, isn't your first language, have a native speaker go through it, because there are very few journals that have English language editing help and will take the time to do it. Pay attention to all ethical standards, and when in doubt, contact the editor. I often get emails from prospective authors that say, I've done a piece of research on this and this, here's the manuscript I'm thinking of submitting, could you please take a look at it, does it fit within your journal? I look at it diagonally, it takes me 5-10 minutes to go through it, and I'll give the author a good idea of whether or not I think it can and should be submitted. Editors are people. Remember that. They're not gods, they're not boo-men, they're not boogeymen. They're people who want to publish good research and have good journals. That means they're more than willing to take the time to answer your emails with questions as to whether it fits, how it should be different, if you have any ideas, things like that. Make use of them. They'll be grateful to you at a later stage if you've done that. Now, I hope that this short webinar will play a small role, not in your doing good research, those are other things, but in getting your manuscript published in the right journal so that you do what you should be doing, and that's increasing our knowledge about what you've been doing research about. Thanks.